Part 5. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 42. Lizzie praised, I was not disappointed. As soon as she heard her talking about good friends, Anaxi's eyes suddenly looked over. You guys are getting along very well. Her tone was very hesitant. She was busy planning the mermaid thing at home today, and she and her family didn't know what was happening outside. Sierra put her chin on the back of her hand and looked over with a smile. Of course, we have all decided to go swimming in the lake together. Uncountable times, deep uneasiness came to Anna 11's heart again. She smiled, picked up the champagne glass on the table and took a sip of wine. Thomas raised his glass to Lizzie, and the young man's voice could not contain his excitement. Mermaid, this is definitely the greatest creature I have ever seen in this world. I am glad that you can hand over the research rights to us. Sierra took a sip of the appetizer soup. Did Dad buy back that magical mermaid? Well, Anai told me that he is full of treasures. Lizzie glanced at the daughter beside Josie dotingly. What she said is absolutely right, and she was praised by 2 experts. It turns out that Anaxi established a connection with the mermaid through this method. Is torturing him and redeeming him considered a strategy? Sierra smiled softly. The heroine, like her villain, had a dirty heart. Maybe I can help. She turned to the 2 experts sitting next to her and introduced herself. I like to be in contact with ferocious creatures. In fact, we also have this plan. Thomas said, I know about Miss Sarah's performance at the freak show that night. Rumor has it that you are an animal trainer. It's a bit exaggerated. Sierra shrugged and smiled, but I am really happy to accept this task. Anaxi clenched her wine glass. I thought it was enough for me to help, and I also had to trouble Sierra. The freak show. Lizzie was also present that night, and he agreed, the mermaid is close to Sierra, she is a good assistant. Anaxi smiled stiffly, okay Daddy. The dinner was quite pleasant, and Sierra also asked where they had kept Roxt, but she was not going to visit him in the past few days. She still had many things to do. The next week, Myra's call to invite Sierra to go to the lake also came. The 2 met to go out together early, and in the afternoon they went to donate books to the school with Mrs. Gigante. The 3 people donated hundreds of textbooks to the school together, hoping that the children would go to school well. This matter was published in the newspapers the next day, and together with the small entertainment news under this big news, it also became a hot topic in the city. Topic. In a boring life, aristocratic scandals are often the favorite topics for people to talk about. Daily headline, Wally City's largest landowner is suspected of overindulging his lover, causing him to commit heinous acts. The Sun headline, Miss Sarah and Miss Myra went to a children's school together to do charity, suspected to save the face lost by Earl Lizzie's lover. Social news, a premeditated golf match, a conspiracy from the Earl's lover. Under each headline, there is a detailed description of what happened on the golf course that day. Ms. Sarah recently returned from home for more than 10 years due to the loss of her mother due to a golf tournament being held at home. Yolanda, the maid of Mawson Manor, was instructed to deliberately lead Miss Sarah, who had received the invitation to the game, to the center of the field. Miss Myra, an unintentional golf ball hit her on the head, causing a fierce conflict between the 2 parties, which spread rumors in the city and had a negative impact on society. According to the latest situation, Ms. Sarah and Ms. Myra resolved the misunderstanding yesterday and sincerely apologized to each other. Who hates 2 innocent 18-year-old girls so much that they tie all conspiracies to them? Who is the ultimate beneficiary of this premeditated plot? In the small striped frame, 2 innocent girls were removed in the briefest words, and Mrs. Josie, whose name did not even appear and was only replaced by her lover, was thrown into the whirlpool of public opinion. Although no one dares to say her identity openly, she has always been criticized, so this is the most appropriate title. Myra held a small parasol and looked at the girl in black skirt on the other side of the boat. You really have no identity at all. If you don't show mercy to the scandal in your family, how will you choose your marriage partner in the future? Sierra replied calmly, I don't care, she has been her mistress for decades, I'm just telling the truth behind her back. Mrs. Ganjit's charity donation came with reporters and media to take photos and publicize it. Yesterday, they ostensibly went to the lake to do charity with her, but in fact they were preparing for this news. The current effect seems to be very good. Myra can change her unkind label into a lady who was innocently involved in the conspiracy, and Sierra can turn the violent rumors about her knocking out the molar into a conspiracy framed by the Earl's lover. All the sources are thrown at Mrs. Josie, who still doesn't know what happened at home. Myra asked, but how did you injure your head like that? The ball didn't hit you at all at that time. You couldn't have hit it on purpose, right? There was also a diagnosis certificate issued by the hospital in the newspaper, which showed that Sierra had a bulge on the top of her head. The subcutaneous hematoma caused by external impact gave her just the right conditions to add fuel to the fire. It was just an accident. Sierra looked at the photo and said with disgust, this scalp photo is really ugly. Myra was silent for a while. Aren't you afraid that this will be exposed again? Sierra dipped her fingers into the cool lake water and said with a smile, who saw it? I was injured until I couldn't bear it, so I went to the hospital for examination. The evidence is all here. Myra was silent again for a while. Anna 11 and I can never be friends again. She originally just wanted to stand up for her friend, but was forced to board someone else's pirate ship. You'd better not be friends with her, Sierra responded with a smile, because she will lose all her friends soon. Looking at the girl's bright smile, Myra silently rubbed her arms. Josie knew something was wrong, and her valet Yolanda was summoned away by Lizzie. When she followed, she saw several newspapers being thrown to the ground by the furious Lizzie. What happened? Master, she opened the door and walked into the study. See for yourself, Lizzie angrily threw the crutches to her feet and said angrily, if Anaxi and Sierra can't get married because of your bad things, just wait. What? Chiao 11 picked up the newspaper on the ground, her beautiful eyes widened, and fear crawled onto her face. She hates being called lover. The bad reputation she wanted to erase for the rest of her life would be printed in bold black ink on newspapers after newspapers. Her name was not mentioned in every word, but she was mentioned in every sentence. Josie sat down on the sofa next to her, her legs unable to stop feeling weak. I didn't expect that the matter would be so serious. Vote comment. Some sites do not have voting functions. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 43. She simply disliked that woman's daughter and wanted to scare her, that's all. I haven't been with Sierra for the past 18 years. Lizzie drank all the wine on the table and said guiltily, look what I have done, and I forced her to apologize to others. The content in the newspaper is not true. Yolanda knelt on the ground and hugged the legs of his suit trousers, and explained at a loss, I guided the lady to the right path as requested by the madam, but she went wrong herself. Even if she went in the wrong direction, Lizzie retracted her feet with force and said angrily, it's because you failed to do your duty as a guide. And you put the blame on Sierra? Is this what Josie taught you? No. Yolanda didn't know what to say, so she could only give Josie a look of help. She wanted to keep her, but Lizzie was determined to fire Yolanda. It was obviously just a trivial matter, but it was leaked out of the manor and spread like this. Everyone except Sierra was in confusion. As soon as she got home, she was faced with an 11 who came to question angrily. Sierra, that ball clearly didn't hit you in the golf match that day. It's been a few days. That medical certificate was clearly a forgery. Throwing the pearl earrings on her ears into the jewelry box, Sierra looked at Anaxi's angry face through the mirror and said calmly, it hit me. You can look at my head. Stop lying. So many people saw that you were fine at that time. Anna 11 walked behind her and actually checked her scalp with her hands. She saw that there was an obvious bulge on it. She couldn't believe it. Did you hurt your head on purpose? She didn't expect that Sira would be so cruel to her in order to frame her mother. Sira, who was just swollen by a marble arm, shrugged. Even if I did it on purpose, who will help you clarify the truth? My friends, and Ericina was confident, they will expose you. This is just a small quarrel caused by you going the wrong way. You'd better explain to your father now. The culprit who deliberately magnified a small matter and pushed it to the forefront of public opinion had crooked eyebrows and an innocent smile. I won't clarify. You can try to invite them to come forward. Which idiot noble lady dares to get involved in such a shabby thing again? It will easily damage her own reputation. Not to mention the loss outweighs the gain. They are crazy to help a mistress who has been published in the newspaper. The only thing Sierra has to deal with now is Eric and Rose Hill, who can see the news. They are the only two people besides Myra who know how she was injured. Sella. Don't go too far, Anaxi was about to cry again. Sierra stood up slowly, turned around and wiped away her lingering tears with her fingers. Your mother stole my mother's life. You occupied my position for 18 years. Who is too much? Anaxi felt suffocated and bit her lower lip hard. I don't want to be born like this, but this is not the reason for you to do bad things and frame others. Even Cyril liked her innocent look that made me pity her. She wiped her tear-stained fingers on Anashi's skirt casually and said lightly, then you and Mrs. Josie move out, so that everything will be clear for nothing. Sierra, she was so choked that she almost couldn't breathe. Sierra put down her hand and said, if you can't do it, stay away from me. We don't mess with each other. The research room where Loseed was imprisoned was temporarily opened. All the carpets inside were removed, leaving a bare oak floor. All the furniture was also removed, leaving only a few long tables with a typewriter and a pile of documents. Table. The water tank placed against the wall is a glass water tank several times larger than the freak show. It is decorated with many stones, flowers, and plants, trying to create a comfortable environment for the creatures inside, as if they are still in the ocean. Syrah only saw a black fan-shaped tail sticking out of the dense aquatic plants. The mermaid's upper body was hidden in the aquatic plants, and her silver hair was entangled with the green grass. She walked to the water tank and found a lot of fish and chips and dead fish sinking to the bottom, as well as a small bucket of fish placed next to the water tank. It looked like Loseid hadn't eaten much in the past 2 days. Sierra picked up the fish bucket and climbed up the ladder next to the top of the water tank. There was a fence door locked from the outside. The key was still inserted in the lock and opened with a slight turn. She carefully sat down next to the edge of the water tank, patted the top of the water tank, and called him softly, Loseid. Hearing the familiar call, the almost motionless patch of water grass suddenly began to dance wildly with the mermaid's movements. His black fan-shaped tail arched against the bottom of the box, and his whole body rushed out of the haystack like a sharp arrow. Sierra felt a flash of silver flash before her eyes, something rushed out of the water and passed through the gate, and her waist was hugged by a pair of hands. Plop! Her center of gravity was unstable, and she was pulled directly into the water tank by the cold webbed hands on her waist. The cold water reached her head in an instant, and a feeling of suffocation followed. She subconsciously struggled to raise her neck to surface, but her lips were blocked by Loseid. The moment she needed oxygen, he sent air filled with the smell of seawater into her mouth. This was not the first time they kissed underwater. Sierra hugged his neck tightly, and her warm body adapted to the water fairly quickly. She opened her eyes in the water, and after a few seconds of blurry retinas, she could clearly see the mermaid with small bubbles stuck to her face just close by. His fish tail squeezed into her vagina, pressing her whole body against the glass wall of the water tank. The wide black skirt bloomed into a flower in the water, wrapping his tail and floating upward. This embarrassing posture, what if those two researchers come in? Syrah put her arm around Rox's neck, held down the hem of his skirt with the other, and bit him hard on the lips. Go up, she angrily voiced her appeal silently. Loosiad licked the place bitten by her, then hugged her waist tightly and emerged from the water with her. Call. With her head above the water and her chest still bearing heavy water pressure, Syrah took a few breaths to calm down and angrily scratched the mermaid's neck with her fingers. Loosiad. You made my clothes wet. The girl's pink nails lightly scratched the gills on the side of the mermaid's neck, causing him to moan slightly before he could speak, and his head lowered to press against her cheek. With this little animal-like clingy behavior and weird noises, Syrah's hand stopped and she realized that she had scratched somewhere she shouldn't have. Her wet fingertips pushed aside his long silver hair stuck to his neck and collarbone. On the white neck, 3 small pink-white scratches were shrinking inconspicuously. She just caught this. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 44. Syrah tentatively reached out to touch it again, and the mermaid that had leaned into the hollow of her neck made the same soft sound again. His tail fin almost wrapped her entire legs in, curling it tighter and tighter. It's your gills, right? She took her hand back and pretended to be calm. Yes. Loosiad kissed her neck and asked in a dumb voice, do you still want to touch it? Sierra pressed his shoulders with her hands. She felt that she heard a strong desire in these words. He liked being touched like this very much. Why did you suddenly become fluent in your speech? She answered the question in an attempt to break the ambiguous atmosphere. Luxid freed up a hand to hold her and pointed at the table outside the water tank. There is someone who will teach me how to speak. He would kiss her neck almost every time he spoke a few words. Syrah thought that it was probably covered with honey, which made him like kissing her so much. She resisted the strange feeling of the greasy fish scales touching her skin, pushed his head and asked him to raise his face to speak. Is it a girl about the same age as me? Yeah. Loosiad nodded. Syrah suddenly understood in her heart that Anaxi had made a lot of efforts while she was away. She hugged his neck again and asked, it seems that you have been together these 2 days, so has she done the same thing as me? What? Loosiad asked confused. The girl put her fingers to her lips, her brows seductive. Kiss here. Loosiad's eyes moved slightly, his gaze stayed on her soft and shiny lips, and he slowly shook his head. The girl's eyebrows suddenly arched and she smiled brightly. That's good. If you kiss her too, I won't want to touch you. He shook his head. I don't like it. Although that person was also full of kindness towards him, he didn't like it. Sierra was satisfied. Okay, then I won't care about you dragging me into the water without permission. I want to see you. But you disappeared for several days. Loosiad reluctantly organized the words to say this. His lake blue eyes were lowered, and his mood was not high. He promised to see her soon, but she disappeared for a few days. Sierra leaned close to his cheek, and their breaths blended on the tip of their noses. I came late because of an accident, and now I have made it up to you. The mermaid's eyelashes fluttered slightly. Compensation. As an unmarried human being, kissing is not something you can give casually. Sierra put 2 fingers together, lowered his chin with her thumb, rubbed his moist lips, and said coquettishly, you can count them. How many times have you kissed me? Are you still not satisfied? Loxida seemed to understand such a long series of words. The only emotion he could understand from the girl's face was that he had taken advantage of him. Lots of kisses, he answered matter-of-factly. As he led her forward in the ocean, he gave her healing and oxygen countless times, and he clearly explored every inch of her lips. So I've made up for it, you can't be angry anymore. The girl smiled and kissed his chin. She grabbed a small fish that had just died and put it to Lugozide's mouth. Have you not eaten recently? I see a lot of untouched food at the bottom of the tank. Yet he obediently opened his mouth and bit the small fish, frowning slightly. It's not fresh. Without her, he wouldn't have any interest in tasting the human food, not even the fish. The fish in the fish bucket must have been freshly processed, and he may like to eat them raw while swimming in the water. Sira said, I will ask my servant to help you buy live seafood every day. From now on, you will have to eat well even if I am not around. You don't come here every day. Lugozide suddenly lost his appetite, and the remaining half of the fish tail fell to the water with a splash, leaving a trace of blood. I have my own things to be busy with, so I can't be in the water with you every day. Sierra held his face and whispered, but I promise to come often. Luxid lowered his head and looked at his thick fish tail. The girl's legs wrapped between him were slender and straight, very beautiful. She lives on her legs out there on land, and the world around her is something he will never be able to touch, since he has no legs. He couldn't help but reach out his hand, pass through the floating skirts, and put it on her legs. It felt like fish scales, smooth and tender. He closed his webbed claws and grasped the meat into his palms. Sira suddenly felt an electric shock in her legs that hit her soul. She didn't know that the mermaid could be so forward-thinking. La sighed. What are you doing? She kicked his tail with her foot, but the force of the kick was as strong as if it were kicked on cotton, which caused no pain or itch to Luoxid. He hesitated for a while, then reluctantly let go of his hand. Do you like legs? Sierra was busy pressing down the hem of her skirt, blushing and glaring at him. You can't be a hooligan if you like it. Hearing the new term hooligan, Lugozide's expression was confused for a moment. He hooked her waist and asked in a low voice, what about the tail? Do you like it? Sierra was stunned for a moment, keenly aware that he was a little sad now, and sighed to coax him, I like it. She leaned over and kissed the pursed lips, then distanced herself from him. I was shocked by your tail the day I rescued you. How could I be willing to save you if I didn't like it? Luoxid's eyes dropped and he whispered, it would be better if I had legs. That way he wouldn't have to stay here to reach her. You are the most perfect sea creature I have ever seen. Sierra comforted him. She pressed her forehead against his and made a promise, I will find a way to send you back to the ocean, and you will definitely be free. Rawside said nothing. He wanted her more than freedom, something that could be had at any time. After eating a few more fish with him, Sira was ready to go back. She had been soaked in water for long enough, and her skin would wrinkle if she soaked it any longer. Seeing her trying to escape from his tail and climb up the water tank, Luoxid held her waist and carried her up. Two researchers came in carrying cardboard boxes full of experimental supplies and happened to see the scene. Miss Sarah. They were startled, put down their cartons and rushed towards her. Why did you fall in? Come out quickly. I'm fine. With a splash, the wet black skirt stuck to her legs and splashed onto the floor. Sierra dragged her body, which weighed several kilograms, down from the ladder. Thomas hurriedly held the ladder on the ground to protect her as she came down. How long have you been in there? Didn't the mermaid attack you? Edward looked curiously at the mermaid with webbed paws against the water tank and his eyes fixed on Sira. He seems to be very special to you. He didn't even take his eyes off her body. It was clear that no matter how they lured her in the past 2 days, this mermaid would just hide in the weeds and remain motionless as a corpse. We have known each other for a long time. He was captured on board the royal cruise ship before it sank. Sira continued to explain the story to Khalida. Please comment and vote. Be more active. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 45. Yesterday Missanae was lying on the glass and talking for a long time, but he didn't respond. Thomas joked, maybe he likes more aggressive beauty. Sierra squeezed the water from her heavy skirt and asked, Can you tell me what Anaxi has been doing here recently? Reading, she tried to make the mermaid talk. Edward picked up the books on the long table, but it didn't work. He never came out of the water plants. It works. Syrah turned her head and glanced at the mermaid stuck to the glass surface. Although she couldn't come out from the water plants, her ears were very sharp and she learned quickly. Then please ask her to teach the mermaid how to speak every day. If she were to teach him how to speak in person, she might be able to kiss him like they just did without saying a few words. She couldn't resist Roxad's charm skills. Even an inadvertent temptation might make her do something worse than a beast. The progress between them couldn't reach that point so quickly. Anaxi's teaching these past 2 days has been quite fruitful, and she has warned Roxad not to kiss other girls, so he can just sit back and enjoy the results for the time being. The mermaid talked a lot to you, Thomas asked. Well, I said a lot. Syrah nodded and did a lot. The two marine experts looked at each other and asked her in unison, it is said that the mermaid's tears can turn into pearls. We are not sure whether this is true or a legend. What is so special about his tear ducts? We want your assist. Sierra frowned, what do you mean? It means, we want you to make him cry and collect some tears. Sierra, Let an 11 try it first. She didn't want to do anything that might ruin her goodwill, let alone make poor Losside cry. If you really want to lose your favor, you have to drag the heroine into the water first. Seeing her dragging her wet body away after refusing, the two experts looked at the syringes brought in the carton and felt a headache for a moment. There are also blood drawing and scale extraction after this, one must be completed first. The mourning period was over in this new week. For dinner, Sierra chose a haze blue silk dress with a round neck and long sleeves. The fabric had no decorations except for a separate pleat to tighten the waist. It was low-key and dignified. The servant helped to arrange the complicated bun, and decorated the small waves on both sides with a few small pearl hairpins, and then said, Miss Myra just called, and she and several other ladies invited you to watch the horse racing tomorrow. Did you invite sister? Cyril looked at her face, and when she heard the servant whispering no, the corners of her lips raised slightly. The atmosphere of the dinner was very serious. She arrived at 7 o'clock, and the whole family except Sierra was already seated. When Lizzie saw what she was wearing, her angry eyes were obviously stunned. It's not because of how beautiful this outfit is, but because Sarah dressed it exactly the way Clemens likes to dress. Her mother didn't like too much jewelry hanging on her body, and always liked matte blue silk satin and complicated buns. Even though the times have eliminated complicated hairstyles and favored simple bobs and updos, she has not changed. Syrah smiled and sat down. I heard there is grilled mackerel that I like tonight. Your mother loves this too, Lizzie said. Sierra glanced at Josie with a gloomy look from the corner of her eye, and said in surprise, it turns out Dad still remembers. Lizzie pursed her lower lip, I haven't forgotten it. He made the mistake of cheating and tried to redeem himself, but Clemens, who had old-era clothes and new-age ideas, would rather die in a foreign country than forgive him. Sierra smiled, it's all over. Is your wound okay? Recovered very quickly. Lizzie nodded, I have asked a lawyer to handle the matter in the newspaper. I hope our family will be harmonious in the future and this kind of thing will not happen again. Josie forced a smile and raised her glass to Sierra, no, Sierra, I promise you, Yolanda has been fired. If the head of the family wants to suppress the scandal, Sierra will also acquiesce, if for no other reason than to prevent Josie and Lizzie from getting married. The next morning she heard from the servant that Anaï had been crying in bed all night because Marseille was not invited. When Sierra saw her at breakfast, her eyes were still red and swollen. Are you going to see Marseille with Myra today? Anaï asked her hoarsely. Well, I'm going out. Sierra waved to her. Anaxi tightened her handkerchief and took a few breaths before pulling out the system. The number of probes today had not been used yet, so she chose Rose Hill. Looking at the place name displayed on it was Hank's Casino, her fingernails almost tore the handkerchief into pieces. Did Sierra go there knowing that Rose Hill would go to the race course today? She doubted whether she had such a magical system like her, otherwise why would she happen to run into them every time? Anaxi, who was full of crisis, quickly stood up with her skirt in hand and told the servant, "I want to go to Hank's racetrack." Of the three men, she had not gained any favorability points at all, so she could no longer be overtaken. The weather is not very good today, and the racecourse is very busy. Since Hank Racecourse was ransacked by a group of gangsters last month, this is the first time they have opened for business, Myra said excitedly. Looting, Sierra suddenly felt that it was a bit dangerous to watch this activity. Myra replied, "Well, this is still an asset in the name of Duke Rose Hill. He hasn't been here for many years." Sierra instantly understood why they would think of inviting her to see Marseille. When her business reopened, her boss would always come to visit. Reminiscent of what Rose Hill once said about herself being a cancer in the kingdom, no matter how she looks at this kind of activity now, it seems like a covert money laundering method. "Have you decided what size to buy before coming here?" Myra asked. "No, whatever, I don't have much money." Sierra handed the money to Myra's servant, asked him to buy a number on her behalf, and walked into the auditorium. What's annoying is that the best front row seats are all standing, except for one person. Khalida was sitting on a white plastic chair in front of everyone, holding a cup of coffee in her hand. She turned around inadvertently and saw Sierra, and waved to her, "Sierra, come here. I'll give you an extra seat." This is where the benefits of having a rich friend come in. She generously provided seats for all the ladies who were with Sierra, at a cost of 3 times the front row ticket price. The families are generally the daughters of nobles who live by collecting rents and raising livestock from landlords. No one could have imagined that the daughter of a wealthy businessman who opened a bank could reach such a level of wealth. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 46. Sierra, who had already seen Khalida's ability, behaved quite normally. She sat down next to her and listened to her chattering. "I heard that your family bought the Kraken back. When can I visit it again?" "How do you know?" Sierra thought Lizzie did this very secretly. "Later I wanted to buy it at a high price, but I was beaten to it." Khalida sighed sadly. "I had planned to throw him into my pond as an ornamental fish, and it was up to you to train him to be obedient." Sierra couldn't help but feel happy. She thought for a moment and said, "Maybe I will really need your help in the future." "Huh? What help?" "My dad wanted to slice him up." "This is really cruel." "Do you know that fish?" "I will definitely help you." During the conversation, Myra next to him suddenly called out shyly, "Duke Rose Hill." Sierra turned her head when she heard the sound, and saw a leather sofa moved to the side by several people. A blond man in a crisp black suit sat down elegantly, looking at her with his dark eyes. What makes him stand out is that as soon as he appears, he can turn any messy environment into a landscape behind him, and even the mud-stained wooden fence in front can become inexplicably high-end. She hadn't seen him for a few days since she slammed the car door and left. When Sierra saw him glancing at her lightly, she looked away. She made a mental calculation and stood up. "I'll go over and say hello." Awkwardness always needs to be resolved, and being frozen all the time is not a problem. On the way to Hank's casino, she met Eric, who was delivering meat, which was a good opportunity for Anashi. Although she didn't understand why he became angry after hearing her slander about Sierra, she knew how to admit her mistakes. "I'm sorry for breaking your heart last time, Eric. Today, Sierra and my friends went to see Marseille. I want to go too, but I don't have a companion. Please go with me." It was with these words that she made Eric reluctantly agree to come to the racecourse with her. She understood that it was because of Sierra that he was willing to go with her, and no matter how unhappy she felt, her goal was achieved. Anaxi could easily see the sisters in the front row, and she bought 2 tickets for the front row, which was right behind them. "Is that Sira and the Duke of Rose Hill?" Anaxi pointed to the most conspicuous leather sofa and said in surprise, "It turns out they made an appointment." It was really expected. This woman with a human face and an animal heart was not idle for a moment to seduce her rich husband. Anaxi's mood was gloomy for a few seconds, and then she quickly hid it. Eric, who was standing next to her, looked along her fingertips. The young and handsome boy's eyes instantly darkened, and he stared at Sira on the sofa without saying a word. She and Rosehill sat side by side, the high backrest only allowed her to expose the back of her head, and the two were very close to each other. "It's just a row of seats," Eric comforted himself. Anai gained a new understanding of his self-hypnosis behavior, which of course made her even more angry. Regarding Sira's uninvited visit, Rosehill did not refuse or invite him. He looked at the horse racing track in front of him with a look of disgust on his face. Sierra tugged at the sleeves of his suit and whispered, still angry. "Let go," he said coldly. No, her left hand was already holding his leather-gloved hand. "I admit that the way I handled the matter last time was wrong." Rosehill tilted his head with a cold expression. "Have you realized your mistake?" This expression and tone really deserve a beating. Sira nodded. "I was wrong, but you were wrong too." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately took his hand back and put it on his knee. Sira looked at the failed palm and tried to calm down her anger. "Rosehill, haven't you ever had any friends? If someone speaks ill of your friend and savior in front of you, don't do anything. Aren't you going to be angry too?" She called him by his full name, and was so angry that she didn't even want to add an honorific to his tale. "No," he answered without looking away, his voice like frost and mist falling in the morning, freezing Sira from head to toe. "No? Nothing." Sierra was stunned and asked, "You don't want to say that no one is worthy of being your friend, do you?" He turned his head to look at her, a look of approval finally appearing in his dark eyes. Sira was speechless. Is he an iron-walled person? He won't listen to any good words and has a terrible temper. Rosehill, who heard her voice, narrowed his eyes. "Are you scolding me?" Stopping the clamor in her head in time, Sierra took a deep breath and said, "No, I treat you as a friend." As soon as these words came out, he was sneered at, after doing that kind of thing. What kind of thing? Her knowing attitude made Rosehill very unhappy. He pinched her chin with one hand and rubbed her pale pink lips heavily with his fingers through leather gloves. "What's a kiss?" Seeing that the two people's heads were almost close to each other, Eric's heart was blocked and he wanted to leave. Anai grabbed his arm and said deliberately, "Eric, Marseille is about to start. You have to accompany me." Eric, who was filled with jealousy, clenched his fists and tightened his jawline. "Why don't you go and say hello to her?" Anaxi also looked at the heads that were close to each other on the sofa, with jealousy burning in her eyes. "Let's go over there later." Her heart screamed loudly to tear off Sierra's mask of innocence in front of Eric, and she wanted to save the situation that was extremely unfavorable to herself. Sierra put her hand on Rosehill's shoulder, painfully avoided his fingers, and moved her hips back. "She is not in the habit of performing kisses in front of so many people. Isn't it the compensation you agreed to give me?" She pointed to the top of her head, trying to recall his memory. Although she took advantage first, didn't he also tacitly agree to use excuses to cover up the fact that she took advantage? Sierra added unhappily, "You said I was not worthy of you before, but I kept it in mind. Now I have settled for being friends with you, and you are still mean to me." What she said was absolutely correct, and Rosehill was silent for a while. Seeing that he was rarely blocked by her, Sierra finally breathed a sigh of relief. Within a few seconds, she curled her lips and began to feel sad again. "It's okay if you think we can't be friends. I came to you today mainly because I hope you won't tell the real reason why I was injured. The last issue of the newspaper, you must have seen it. Does he seem like a person who talks a lot? Rosehill looked at her expressive and changeable expression and twitched her lips. You want me to help you keep a secret? Sierra nodded, then leaned close to his ear and whispered, if I frame Mrs. Josie is exposed, it will be over. Kongaya. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the shore. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 47. I never help people in vain, Rosehill suddenly said slowly. You want reward? You knocked my bag out. Sierra glanced at his arm with meaning. You came here yourself. He didn't want to give her any room for negotiation. It's because your servant is not good at driving, Sierra said seriously. I've never seen anyone drive so badly. Aldine, who was standing nearby as a benchmark, saw that the matter was involving him and quickly replied, you wanted to go home directly with the master at that time. I said that because the sun was very bright and he looked uncomfortable. You are thinking wrongly, Sierra argued. Aldine was blocked after being rebutted. Why are we vampires afraid of the sun? It's just that the skin reacts to light. Can you say this? She was going to die if she told her, and no human could survive safely knowing the secret that the vampires had kept for centuries. Rosehill's expression relaxed slightly. He did have enough reason to believe that besides taking advantage, she was also afraid that he would be burned by the sun. Well, if you need anything, you can come to me. Sierra raised 3 fingers. I will serve you 3 things unconditionally. You are responsible for helping me suppress any possibility of exposing the matter. Feeling that the hint was not enough, Sierra whispered in his ear again, I can do anything for you. Aldine looked away. Naked and ambitious seduction was more straightforward than taking advantage. The master hated this kind of thing the most. Rosehill glanced at her beautifully shaped lips, and the rose-flavored jelly she longed for was playing in her ears. The layer in her iris suddenly shattered, and the low voice was silky and melodious, deal. Aldine turned his head, his face showing emotional cracks. Sierra was overjoyed, but she restrained the corners of her lips from rising crazily, and said softly, then I'll wait for your call. I'm going back to my companions now. When she stood up with her skirt in hand, Anaxi's voice suddenly appeared behind her. Sierra. Sierra turned around, her heart pounded and she almost lost her breath. The horse racing competition officially started at this moment. Behind them were 10 horses that broke out of the railing and galloped onto the sandy track. Countless waves of cheers for the riders and horses followed. The deafening noise blocked Eric's voice from opening his mouth to speak to her. When did Anasi bring him here, and how long had he been standing there? Even Rosehill, who hated werewolves, didn't remind her. Sierra calmed down and waved to them as if nothing happened. She walked up the path to the back row, separated from them by a low fence that divided the viewing area. Anaxi clung to Eric's side, clearly intending to declare her sovereignty. How long have you been here? Sierra asked with a smile. Since you sat down in the Duke's exclusive seat. I didn't call you because you were chatting happily, Anna 11 replied. Sierra nodded and looked at Eric again. His eyes were calm, his wheat-colored hands were in his trouser pockets, and he stared at her without saying a word. What did you just say to me? She asked. There was too much shouting and I didn't hear it clearly. Eric said stiffly, I said hello to you. Anyone who is not blind can tell that he is unhappy, and there is nothing hidden on the young man's youthful face. Sarah thought for a moment and extended an invitation to him. Last time you bought me a fruit basket. When Marseille ends, can I treat you to a cake? They had agreed on this before. Eric opened his lips, and just as he was about to blurt out the word good, he was interrupted by Anna 11. She felt that she was about to be squeezed out by the lustful looks of the two of them. Eric wants to take me home. Let's take $2 with us on the way. No need to bother you. She took another step forward to try to get more of herself in Eric's eyes. Sierra's smile was fixed, and the curve of her lips quickly dropped. Okay, then I'll eat by myself later. Sierra, I can. Eric called her, but he was interrupted again before he wanted to eat cake with her. Then I'll go back to my seat to watch the game. I don't know how much money I will lose, haha. Ignoring Eric's somewhat panicked look, she forced a smile, took a step back, and quickly turned around to leave. Anaxi's heart sank to the bottom when she saw Eric almost jumping over the railing and chasing after him. Eric, you just promised to send me back, you can't leave me alone among these men. Eric stopped himself from making impulsive steps, and his angular face became tense. He saw Sierra and the disgusting vampire together, and agreed to Anaxi's request to send her home safely later. Now he feels a little regretful. Sierra must be sad, she might want to explain to him. And Eleven's face wasn't too happy to keep someone here, and she even felt that she was in a worse mood. Several of her friends didn't turn around to say hello to her and were all chatting with the wealthy businessman's daughter. Eric's 10 points of family affection points that had dropped in the system had not returned, and the love points of the three men were like a pool of stagnant water. Sierra, who returned to her seat, faced repeated bombardments from Myra and her sisters. Except for Khalida, who valued money activities more than men, no one was still thinking about betting on horse racing. What did the Duke say to you? I see you have been chatting for a long time. Tinny told me what you and the Duke were doing in the car outside the church last time. Does he like you? Question after question, each one looking more envious than the last. Sierra leaned against Khalida. I confessed my love to him before, but it's a pity that he doesn't like me. Really, no one's eyes were suspicious. Sierra had no choice but to say, we are just friends reminiscing about old times. It's because Tingny's eyesight is bad. If the Duke liked it, I would have come to his house to get engaged. So they were just playing, hoping that these young girls would understand and stop pestering them. They reluctantly gave up questioning her, and the results of the 3.5-lap horse race came out immediately. The horse with the number 9 broke out of the encirclement and won the first place, and the numbers behind it came up one after another. The moment all the numbers were ranked, Myra beside her raised her hands and shouted excitedly, and there were also all kinds of disappointed sighs around her. Sierra was in no mood. It wasn't until Myra shook her head that we won money that she suddenly realized that she had won money. With so many numbers in the order of horse racing, they were lucky enough to bet on the champion horse. Because it was an unpopular horse and not many people bought it, the odds were very high. She was very happy, but it was just a bet, and Sierra had no interest in betting anymore. She didn't pick a lucky number when she went out today. She had better go back early to see the mermaid and think about how to deal with Eric later. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 48. I won't play anymore, let's go first, she said in Myra's ear, and said hello to Khalida. She bought numbers for several games in a row, and she just lost money now. Still waiting to continue. Sierra took the record paper handed over by Myra's servant that could be exchanged for money, stood up and waved in Rose Hill's direction. I won. The girl's sweet voice was drowned in the cluttered background, but still reached his sensitive ears. She left the exclusive VIP channel and prepared to go to the betting hall to change the money. Eric, who was still standing in the crowd, glanced at the direction she left and said, let's go too. Anaxi threw away the paper she missed and turned around to chase him. Wait for me, Eric. There are many people exchanging money in the betting hall, and it's a mixed bag. Whether you are a merchant, a noble, or a beggar on the street, as long as you can afford it, you can come here to gamble. Sierra stood in the smoky hall, looking at the crazy people in a few rows of seats, and knew that they had gambled several times here since opening and lost all of them. She waited patiently in line to collect the money, not paying much attention to the fearful and lewd looks on her body. 3 open-top Ford Model T cars were speeding in a row on the street, scaring many people around. Eric, who was sitting in the car with Anna 11, kept looking at the road behind, trying to find Sierra's figure, but he couldn't find any familiar figures, only those T-model cars heading straight to the race course. He frowned, sensing a danger signal. Parking. Joey in front stopped the car. Anna 11's heart tightened and she quickly asked, "Where are you going? Aren't you going to buy cakes with me?" Sierra didn't come out of the race course, Eric said in a deep voice. "Stop the car." He calculated the time. If there was no accident, she would have bumped into him from the moment she came out of the VIP express lane. "Go back by yourself." Eric opened the car door. "Maybe she's waiting for the Duke of Rose Hill." Anna tried to hold him back, but his speed was too fast. As soon as he pulled the door open, the person rushed out like a strong leopard. "Eric," Anna slapped the seat cushion where he had just sat, with a sharp voice that made Joey, the driver in front of him, turn around frequently. It seems that the version he spread about toads eating swan meat can be slightly changed, because the Orion is obviously in love. In the hall, it was Sierra's turn to change money at the window. She handed the exchange paper to the people inside when she heard a commotion behind her. In the already smoke-filled hall, several sturdy men wearing Henley shirts and overalls poured into the door. The guns on their waistbands showed that they were a group of people who were not easy to mess with. Sierra sighed in her heart when she saw the other party walking straight towards the window where she was. She happened to run into a gangster who came to rob the store on the first day of business. That is to say, this plot is always dedicated to adding a new way of death to her death book. Rose Hill, who was still sitting on the race course, moved his eyes slightly, and the smell of gunpowder from a gun barrel thousands of meters away entered his nasal cavity. A few desperate guys entered the number-buying hall. Aldine had accurately identified their location and said, "Sella just passed by." Her smile excitedly telling him about winning money flashed back in her mind. Rose Hill stood up, his already gloomy face pale and cold, cruelty condensed in his eyes. He left with a long step. After disappearing from the crowd's sight, there were only 2 black after-images moving as fast as Aldine, and only a large amount of dust was stirred up on the ground when he passed by. Sierra was about to take the money handed over from the window and leave the dispute that was about to break out, but as soon as a wad of money was delivered from the window to the table outside, the second she pressed her hand up, she was hit by a bigger hand. A hand suppressed it. The entire back of the hand was pressed into a calloused palm, and it was impossible not to panic. Sierra raised her head while pretending to be calm and saw that the other person's face was very clean, but he was a bit old and had some gray hair on his temples. "Miss, this is our protection money." The man in a gray suit smiled at her, with a luxury cigar dangling from his lips and his teeth were very white. "The gangster makes a good living from robbery, and he dresses like a serious gentleman." As soon as Rose Hill walked in, she heard this unique comment among the many fearful and noisy hearts. He noticed Sierra's suppressed hand and narrowed his eyes slightly. Aldine clapped his hands to attract everyone's attention, and said in an extremely friendly tone, "Our boss will handle this matter now. For the sake of their own safety, those who have nothing to do with it should leave immediately. Of course life is more important than money," but in a few seconds everyone in the hall except the gangsters and Sierra ran away. Sierra also wanted to run, but her hand was still tightly pressed. She looked at Rose Hill, her milky brown eyes lit up for a moment, and then she said in a bad tone, "Why did you just come in without any weapons? Did you call the police?" Hearing her call the police, several gang members smiled disdainfully. The money leaked from their fingers was quite a lot for those people every month. The Duke is the boss here who hasn't been seen for several years. The man pressing the back of Sierra's hand held a cigarette in his lips and exhaled a puff of white mist. His eyes scanned Rose Hill up and down. No wonder they don't pay the protection fee every time we come to collect it. If we pay it honestly, go ahead. How could something like that happen that no one wants to see happen in UNA? An accomplice said, I heard that you have a lot of assets in your hands, such as a hospital, a casino, and arms. You have done all kinds of dirty things. We are all in the same group. Let us come here every day to collect protection fees. It is not excessive. The implication is that they can't offend anyone, it's enough that they are all colleagues. Aldine stood by the door and smiled, another bunch of damn idiots. Rosehill slowly took off his gloves and didn't answer a word. He only said to Sarah in front of the cash counter, the most important thing you should do now is to close your eyes, don't look at anything, and don't speak. His voice was calm, filled with danger and warning. Sierra could vaguely guess what this cruel duke would do. She glanced at the arrogant gang boss next to her, and a trace of pity flashed in her eyes. The same cannon fodder has different fates. I think it's still too late for you and your people to admit your mistake and run away, she tried to persuade her. Miss, that's not how dogs look down on people. The man lowered his head and carefully stroked her fingers with his rough palms. No matter what, I will be the one who makes you scream. Sierra closed her eyes obediently. Mr. Rosehill, I won't peek. I hope you can help me preserve the body. Her purpose is that the Virgin Mary cannot be possessed for more than 3 seconds at most, and she must die if she deserves it. Keep reading, stay steady and prepare for the second round of PK. Don't forget to vote. It doesn't matter which way you stand, haha. Another explanation, nobles are not necessarily richer than the wealthy businessmen who have risen from the workers. Some nobles are lazy and rely on rent collection and capital to live. Sometimes it is possible to make ends meet and go into debt. The only good-sounding name is the title, and they are also inferior people. If you want it desperately, there will be many marriages between merchants and nobles. So it's not impossible to be reluctant to buy super expensive ferry tickets and jewelry. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Gui Cheng. Chapter 49. Rosehill stared at that hand, his dark eyes like a ferocious beast staring at its prey. He put his gloves on the backs of a row of seats, unbuttoned 2 buttons of his suit jacket, and revealed the sharp lips under his perfect lips. The teeth are like 2 sharp blades emitting cold light. The too pale complexion and fangs finally made several gangsters around him realize that something was wrong. Just as they were about to take out their guns and threaten him, Rosehill moved in front of the leader who was pressing down on Sarah. No one could see clearly what he was doing. Able to teleport to a place more than 10 meters away. In the horrified eyes of their accomplices, they only saw their boss's smile frozen, his neck twisted back in an incredible arc, and the cigar in his mouth fell to the ground and scattered a little ash, dirtying the Duke who had turned into a hunter. Pant legs. The big hand pressing on the back of Sierra's hand moved away. She was not sure if she had just heard the sound of bones being broken, because in just a few seconds, she heard extremely frightened voices coming from all directions in front of her. Screams, those screams were twisted and broken, louder than the gunfire that penetrated the roof. She subconsciously took the money on the counter and took 2 steps back, her whole back pressed against the glass window of the cash desk. Someone kept trying to rush to the door. Aldine, who was responsible for guarding the door, raised his hand, held a young man's neck and threw him back. Wow! With an easy throw, he threw the person directly to the money withdrawal counter next to Sierra. The glass shattered with the force of the person's violence, and the broken pieces fell at her feet. The loud bang like an explosion frightened her. She winced suddenly. Rosehill turned around, and his cold eyes made Aldine put down his hand in embarrassment. My hand slipped, I'm sorry. For a minute, maybe not even a minute, the screams in her ears disappeared completely, and there was only the sound of shoes stepping on the broken glass getting closer and closer to her. Rosehill. The girl's curled and tightly closed eyelashes trembled violently, and her delicate and beautiful face turned pale with fear. Cold fingers touched her face like a snake's letter. The unexpected coldness made Sierra tremble and she subconsciously raised her face. "Don't open your eyes," he said calmly, with the cruel murderous intent still on his face. Sierra touched his hand. "Are you hurt?" "It's very cold." The hand on his face was quickly withdrawn. Sissel put on his gloves again and said softly, "Come out with me." Soon, the palm of his leather glove wrapped around her hand, intending to take her away. Sierra held the money in one hand and was held by him in the other. Her eyelashes trembled and her voice was embarrassed. "My legs are weak, wait a minute." Just based on the screams that lingered in her ears, she could imagine the scene of two people killing everyone. Trouble Rosehill's tone was irritated, but in the next second, two hands passed through her waist and behind her knees respectively. The body was picked up in vain. Sierra subconsciously opened a slit of her eyes to find the position of his neck and put her arms around it. In her blurry peripheral vision, she saw a bloody severed hand on the ground and an unburned cigar dropped beside a crushed and rotten finger. Sierra's heart shrank in fear, and she pushed her face into Rosehill's neck. Being tickled by her hair, his tone was cold and strange. "Don't open your eyes." "I didn't open it." Sierra's voice was distorted by fear, and she couldn't even admit what she saw until she died. Aldine stepped away from the door and glanced back with an unknown meaning. "The smelly guy is back again." As soon as he finished speaking, the closed door of the betting hall was kicked open by an external force, and the afternoon sunlight slanted into the hall. Eric's chest rose and fell rapidly and his breathing became rapid. Seeing the scene inside and smelling the strong smell of blood, he suddenly froze. The beautiful and frightened aristocratic girl nestled tightly in the arms of the vampire. The two of them walked from the shadows into the sunlight together, as beautiful as a picture scroll. Hearing the exclamations of a living person outside, Sierra finally opened her eyes, and her intense heartbeat calmed down. Eric's unique voice-changing voice came to her ears. She looked in the direction of the sound, and saw that the sunny werewolf boy was sweating profusely, with beads of sweat rolling down his forehead from his hair that was close to his scalp, and worry and guilt hidden in his three-dimensional facial features. He seemed to have come running. Sierra smiled at him with a white face. "I'm fine, Eric." The forced smile made Eric put aside the danger of not being able to get close to the vampire. He strode up to her and held one of her hands on her abdomen. Rosehill's eyes also moved down and became frozen. Seeing that there was only Sierra between him and the werewolf, Aldine made a gesture of preparation for battle. His face was much more serious than when he was inside. A wolf that has transformed into a minor is also dangerous. "Are you injured?" Eric asked guiltily. Although he didn't smell any blood on the girl, he was still worried about it. "I didn't, the Duke saved me." Sierra was still nestled in this cold embrace. She looked at Eric's anxious look and suddenly said in surprise, "You came back from sending Anna 11 off so soon?" Eric shook his head. "I got off the bus halfway. If only I could come earlier." He glanced at Rosehill, his expression concealing disgust. "It would be better if I came earlier." Hearing him gnashing his teeth, Sierra looked up and found that the two people looked at each other awkwardly, and there was a high probability that they were going to fight. Rosehill, who was holding her, had a slight blush on his face, but he was not angry. The three of them were still standing in the sunshine, with countless people watching around them. "This is not good." Before she could laugh at Anaxi, who was left behind, Sierra withdrew the hand held by Eric and tugged on the collar of Rosehill's suit. "Can you take me home?" "I don't have a driver." "Come pick me up." "I'll take you home, Sierra," Eric said firmly. "You can't go with him, it's not safe." Sierra grabbed Rosehill's collar and shook her head at him. "You should go back early." "I won't be in danger. He just saved me." Rosehill, who had not said a word during the whole process, raised the corners of her lips slightly, glanced at Eric with a mean and arrogant look, and then hugged the girl and got into the classic car. Eric, who was rejected, couldn't tell which one was more distressed, guilty or sour. He slapped the car window in the back and warned the vampire inside, "You'd better send her home safely instead of treating her as a post-war supplement, otherwise I will definitely come and tear you apart." The arrogant words only received a mocking look from Rose Hill. Hearing him speak so fiercely, Sierra immediately frowned and stopped him. "Eric, don't talk like that." Aldine stepped on the accelerator and the car sped along. Standing in the sun, Eric's sweat dripped from his jawline, which was gradually getting stronger. His mood also worsened to the extreme due to Sierra's choice. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Cheng. Chapter 50. If he had not agreed to Anaxi's request, if he had agreed to go eat cake with Syrah, he would not have sent her into the hands of the vampire. He was extremely upset, and regret also took over at this moment. After standing in the sun for a short time, Eric still picked up the pace and chased in the direction where the car disappeared. He always wanted to make sure that she was safe. A few minutes later, irrelevant people were dispersed at the door of the betting hall. One after another, the necks or limbs of the bodies were broken, and the miserable corpses were carried out covered with white cloths. The police negotiated with the casino manager. The Duke and his servants cleaned up the gang, the person in charge said without a smile. The police officer smiled awkwardly and said, "I have warned them not to mess around." But they did it anyway. Because the Duke, whose wealth was comparable to that of the country, had never set foot on this land before, they all thought that such a small horse racing farm would not attract attention at all, so they took bribes and let the gangsters go. None of them expected that Rose Hill would spend the summer temporarily recuperating here due to a shipwreck. Duke cleaned up Wally's gang. He is a hero. We will deal with this and find someone to repair this place. The police officer tried to make peace. The person in charge, who was backed by the big boss behind the scenes, smiled and said, "No, the police officer should go back and talk to Whitman and tell him to pay attention to his personal safety recently." After all the corpses were removed, the person in charge and several racecourse staff stood together and lit a few cigarettes, each with a meaningful smile. As early as they heard that the Duke had come to Wally, they had invited him to visit the racetrack, which had been closed down by gangsters for a long time. Even if this didn't happen today, their boss would find time to clean up the cockroaches in the sewers. In the classic car, Sierra looked at Rose Hill from head to toe. His cuffs were clean, 2 buttons on his chest were loose, his trouser legs were stained with dust, and his face hidden in the shadows returned to a pale and unhealthy look at the speed of light. Nothing happened to him. Wondering how I did it, Rose Hill tilted her head, her cold voice slightly softer. Cyril looked at him and noticed that the dark red color spread out from his irises like dye. She shook her head calmly, "Just because you told me to close my eyes means you don't want me to know. I won't ask." Rose Hill looked at her for a long time, and couldn't tell whether it was disappointment or something else. He just said lightly, "Very smart. You didn't dislike Eric today." Sierra poked his strong arm, "Have you acquiesced in him becoming my friend?" A wrinkle appeared on his smooth forehead as soon as he heard the name. Before he could say anything worse, Sierra covered his mouth in time. "Okay, I know, you still want to say you don't deserve it." The girl's sweet fragrance instantly overwhelmed his sense of smell, her cold lips touched her palm, and the venom-filled fangs hidden in her mouth were about to move. Rose Hill's eyes darkened, and the desire to eat scratched his throat. He swallowed in his throat, grabbed her arm with one hand, and pressed it on the leather cushion. Aldine parked the car at the entrance of the manor in time. Rose Hill opened the door beside Syrah, and said in a silky and delicate voice with an abnormal low hoarseness, "Get out." Syrah, who had long sensed something was wrong, moved quickly, and his feet were already on the ground the moment he finished speaking. As soon as she closed the car door, the old car quickly disappeared. Sierra's straight back immediately relaxed, and her whole body relaxed. She is not a fool. There are so many corpses and blood in the betting hall. Rosehill will definitely not leave 2 bloody holes for the corpse in a crowded place. He just saw that her state was completely hungry, but he has strong restraint. Didn't bite her. Sierra touched her neck with lingering fear. As long as she keeps pretending to be stupid and doesn't know that he is a vampire, the chance of being killed or transformed will be very small. Go to the police station. Rosehill, who was sitting in the car, licked his lips, with a cruel expression on his pale face. He urgently needs to calm down the desire stirred up by Sierra. He needs some fresh food. Aldine also showed his thirst for blood. It's time for a new manager of the police station here. After taking a shower and changing clothes, Sierra walked to the window and planned to close the ventilation window, when she saw a half-naked young man standing among the branches of a giant oak tree in the distance in the dark twilight. Sierra's pupils trembled and she looked incredulously. That was clearly Eric. Seeing her intact at the window, Eric, who had been standing for a long time, quickly jumped down from the tree more than 10 meters high, landed easily on his feet and ran away without making a sound. His vigorous figure disappeared into the darkness with the last twilight, and Sierra locked the window and drew the curtains with a complicated expression. She didn't expect him to stay there for so long for her own safety. After standing behind the curtain for a while, she slowly raised her lips and hummed a little song before going downstairs to eat. At dinner time, Anai did not appear in the restaurant. Sierra went over to sit down and ask specifically, "Anaxi won't come for dinner tonight." She came back crying, and now she has lost her appetite, so she took food to help feed the mermaid. Xiao 11 said pointedly, "I heard that you went to the racecourse with her friends today, but you didn't invite her." Lizzie didn't look too good either. Sisters should help each other. This wasn't the first time he'd conveyed this idea to Sarah. "We are all a family, of course I understand." Sierra sighed innocently, "but they are only willing to invite me. The big problem is not with me. Mrs. Josie made such a fuss about ostracizing me that no one dares to play with Anashi now." When old things were brought up again at the dinner table, Josie completely lost her dignity and kindness, and her expression was dull and gloomy. "Sierra," Lizzie warned, "I thought this matter was over. It's in the past. If she didn't ask, I wouldn't tell her the reason." Sierra threw the napkin into the plate and stood up, with a calm tone, "And Dad, don't you ask me what I did today. There is only Anaxi who can shed tears in her eyes. Do you know if there was no Rosehill today, Duke, did I almost die?" The atmosphere at the entire table fell to the bottom. Lizzie heard that she almost died, and looked at Josie, who was also confused, in great shock. Anai and Joey didn't say anything when they came back. "Then remember to read the newspaper tomorrow." Sierra moved the chair and said in a cold voice, "I'm going to check on the mermaid too. I wonder if Anasi has fed him anything messy." She also forgot about instructing the kitchen to prepare live seafood every day. Now she went to the kitchen and spoke to Mrs. Martha, who was in charge of the dishes, and took a few alive mackerels from her. Rush. After dressing up as the evil girl in the second game, I opened my eyes and found myself in the Sure. Author, Mei Guicheng. Chapter 51. Carrying the bucket swaying in the water, I came to the room where Luoxide was locked up. The door was ajar, and the sound of reading could be heard from inside. The mermaid prince said that his life was saved by the princess, so he wanted to marry her, but he didn't know that he was just an impostor with no sincerity. The person who really saved him was the person who later bought him from a freak show. The innocent girl who came back. Anaxi leaned against the glass and held up a book and gave an emotional speech. The mermaid fell in love with the innocent girl at first sight from the first moment he saw her. He was deeply attracted to her, and they were a couple in love. Syrah raised her eyebrows, and suddenly discovered that the sisters, who had part of the same blood flowing through their bodies, were surprisingly consistent in lying. This content is the magically modified version 3.0 of Mermaid. You are wrong. The sound through the water tank is beautiful and pleasant. The face revealed from the swaying water plants is evil and beautiful, and the pair of lake blue eyes are charming and clear. This was the first time that Lugo 11, who was hiding in the water plants, spoke to Anna 11 face to face. She turned her head and stared directly at him. The close gaze made her breathing difficult. What did you say? You're wrong, Losside repeated. Did I make a mistake? Anna 11, who heard clearly, was stunned. You have heard this story before. Luosied nodded. The mermaid prince likes the princess. After correcting his mistake, he turned his head and stared at the door with burning eyes. Sierra. The gentle and dependent tone was completely different from when she had just corrected the error in her story. Anaxi's nails clenched into the leather book, leaving a small crescent-shaped mark. Sierra stood outside the door with a smile that almost couldn't be stretched. Knowing that she had been discovered, she rubbed her face to regain her expression, knocked on the door and went in to say hello, good evening, Anai. Sierra the mermaid waggled its tail fins actively and pressed its webbed palms against the glass. What did you bring? Sierra barely lifted the bucket a little, smiled and said, something delicious. Anaxi held up the fairy tale book with a mermaid on the cover, suppressed her temper and asked, have you told him a story? Sierra put the bucket down next to the water tank, walked over and her eyes fell on the book cover. Mermaid. Yes, I told you about it, but it's different from your narcissistic version. Anaxi took a deep breath to adjust her mentality that was about to explode, placed the book heavily on the table, pressed it with her palms, and turned her head. Are you the same as me? She finally asked the question. Sierra asked in confusion, what do you mean? Do you have something called a system like me? Do you want to compete for the love of these three men like me? Do you want to take them all for yourself by any means necessary? These words were stuck in her throat. Anna 11's mouth was slightly open, and she didn't say anything out several times. Seeing that she had a heart attack and a mouth hatch, Sierra slowly returned to the water tank and found that there were more fish and chips and dissected sashimi on the bottom than before. She frowned and turned around and asked, you've been feeding him fish and chips for the past 2 days? What do you think about throwing such greasy things into the water? Because he is very happy after seeing you feed him, Anna 11 replied reluctantly. She even climbed up and fed her with her hands, but the mermaid didn't buy it at all. Sierra, who saw through her thoughts, laughed angrily. You never thought that he would only eat because I fed him with my own hands. Are you still persisting in giving him this every day? After receiving the critical attack and taunting her face to face, Anaxi's eyes immediately turned red. Sella. I asked my father to buy him back. I saved him. I took care of him. So she should be special. If Sierra hadn't done anything extra on that boat, things would have turned out exactly as she imagined. Sierra nodded, thank you for rescuing him and taking care of him with fish and chips. As for Edward and Thomas wanting him to cry for pearls, have you figured out a way? Anaxi choked, glanced at Luxid, and said aggrievedly, I won't do it, I don't want to make him sad. Sierra Luosied was dissatisfied with being left out and patted the glass surface with his webbed paws, trying to attract her attention. Sierra, who was still in the confrontation, turned to wink at him, and turned back with a hiss. It's a pity that the experiment can't be carried out. Dad's money will be wasted because of you. Anaxi clenched her fists. You are here to help too, so don't talk nonsense. Well, you propose to buy him back for experiments, Sierra sighed. I'll try my best to overcome my reluctance and sadness to help you. There's no other way, right? I can't let him come back now. Go to the sea. If she kept talking, Anaxi found that she was about to become the culprit of the mermaid's misery. You don't need to talk anymore, she stamped her feet, lifted her skirt and rushed out. After the popularity was gone, Sira turned back to deal with Logosied with a victorious lip. Let's make a deal first. I'll go up to feed you dinner later, and you can't drag me into the water again. I'll get sick easily when the water gets cold at night. Understanding what she meant, Logosied obediently nodded his slightly pointed chin. Sila struggled to climb up the ladder to the top of the tank with a bucket of live fish. She opened the locked gate and poured all the live fish and water into the tank. The fresh swimming mackerel caught the attention of Rawside, who was already hungry, and it would wander like a ghost in the water. He bit into a mackerel that was trying to escape, and blood instantly filled his mouth and polluted the surrounding water. Sira quietly watched his ferocious way of eating, her eyes slowly moved to his swinging black tail, and she couldn't help but start to imagine how his legs would split apart. The plot in the novel mentioned that in the later period, he split his legs for love. Sierra was quite looking forward to it, looking forward to what he would look like after he had legs. 5 Spanish mackerel. Logosied rolled his tongue around the last exposed section of the fish tail and swallowed it in his stomach. The satisfied upper reaches emerged from the water. Sierra. He put his arms around her waist affectionately, and controlled his strength not to take her into the water again. The wet hair fell on the hem of her skirt, carrying the salty smell of sea water. This was at least better than the drenched clothes. Sierra touched his lips that were leaning towards her and said, "Did you listen to me or kiss me here, someone else?" No, he stared directly at her lips, his intention obvious. Sierra held his face, looked at it, and sighed, "They want you to cry now, what should I do?" "My tears will not turn into pearls," he breathed coolly against her lips. "It won't turn into pearls." Sierra touched the tail of his slightly raised eyes and asked curiously, "Then where did the legend come from? Everyone thinks that the mermaid's tears will turn into pearls." Logosied consumed her words for a while before forming words to reply, "We lied to people.